When your time is up, it's up. But some people don't wait for the reaper, they call him over. A preacher delivering a sermon to a den of lions. A terrorist arming a bomb vest just as a text arrives. A gangster casting his fishing line beneath live power cables. What could possibly go wrong? On today's episode of the Infographic Show, we're looking at the brilliant minds worthy of the Darwin Awards. Troy Leon Gregg murdered 2 people in 1973 during a robbery attempt. He was sentenced to death, and his crimes were so heinous that the state Supreme Court upheld that decision. But that is not how Gregg died. In 1980, Gregg and 3 other inmates became the first men on death row to escape Reidsville State Prison. All he had to do afterward was lay low and not draw attention to himself. But Gregg, he wasn't that kind of guy. To celebrate his newfound freedom, he went to a biker bar frequented by members of the Outlaws Motorcycle Club. He got extremely drunk, and he tried hitting on a waitress who wanted nothing to do with him. When he turned violent, a group of bikers quickly stepped in and beat him to death. And it all happened on the same day he escaped. Troy Leon Gregg isn't the only inmate to get executed by natural selection. Michael Anderson Godwin was a violent man with a history of robbery, assault, and murder in South Carolina. But he narrowly avoided the electric chair, receiving a life sentence instead. One that, with good behavior, might eventually have led to parole. But while serving his time, Michael made the bizarre decision to try to repair a pair of wired headphones by chewing through the wires like a raccoon. Unfortunately for him, he was also sitting on his wet metal prison toilet at the time. His body turned into a living and then not living transistor. Can't get the electric chair? Make your own. You've heard of a life hack, this is a death hack. The real shame is that it seems Michael really turned it around in prison. He was seen as a model prisoner by many, had earned 2 different degrees in education and hoped to work with young people upon his release. Now his legacy will be a footnote on a Wikipedia page called Toilet-Related Injuries and Deaths. Sometimes Darwin Awards deaths are like the dark side of freedom. We have the right to do stupid and dangerous stuff in life. And that was a point argued by 21-year-old Derek Kuiper back in 2004. He wrote an op-ed for the Daily Nebraskan titled, "Individual Rights Buckle Under Seatbelt Laws." In the article, he argued that seatbelt laws step on our personal freedoms. Interestingly, at the start of this article, there's an editor's note saying the Daily Nebraskan is no longer accepting feedback to this column. And that's because Derek Kuiper lived and died by his principles, losing his life in a high-speed rendezvous with his own windshield just weeks after penning the article. He likely would have survived if only he was wearing a seatbelt. There are plenty of ways you can die doing high-risk, low-reward stupidity. Just ask 23-year-old Michael Genter, though he might struggle to answer with something lodged in his throat. That and the fact that he died back in 1998. Genter was dared by 3 of his idiot friends to swallow a 5-inch fish whole. But because Michael was not the throat goat, we'll meet one of those later, he started to choke, the fish's tail sticking out of his mouth like something straight from a cartoon. Despite their attempts, his friends were unable to dislodge the fish from their buddy's gullet. Eventually, they called the emergency services, but sadly, it was already too late. While it was obviously a tragedy, the death was pretty dumb and avoidable. So much so that even the local police shared poor Michael in the news afterwards. Major Mike Matulovich was quoted as saying, "If I dare you to jump off a bridge and you do it, and you're 23 years of age, you're stupid." And harsh as it may be, it's honestly pretty tough to disagree with him on that. But fish weren't the only animals tangled up in these Darwin Awards. In 1981, David Kerwin decided to visit the majestic Yellowstone National Park. 24-year-old Kerwin, along with his friend Ronald Ratliff and Ratliff's dog Moosey, were out exploring the hot springs. The area was plastered with signs warning visitors to stay clear of the geysers, where the acidic water was nearly hitting boiling temperatures. Of course, that didn't apply to Moosey. Being a dog, he can't read. So the pooch jumped in, and he promptly began changing states of matter at alarming speed. Kerwin immediately jumped into the geyser to save the dog, despite the fact that the only way to get some of Moosey back would have been a metal bucket on the end of a very tall crane. He was instantly horrifically burned, destroying his eyes and skin and flash-frying his internal organs. His friend was able to drag him out of the geyser by his mostly intact hand, and by all accounts his last words before succumbing to his injuries were, "How bad am I? That was a stupid thing I did." He was dead by the next day, despite hospital workers trying their best to save him. Okay, so that one was really sad. Let's go for a Darwin death that's a little more whimsical, like the demise of Madame Sophie Blanchard, one of Europe's most famous balloonists. In the late 1700s, she rode the skies in hot air balloons, the cutting edge of transport in the day. Her husband, Jean-Pierre, was a pioneer of gas-powered balloons until he suffered a fatal heart attack mid-flight. And because balloonists, like balloons themselves, always need to go out with a bang, Blanchard decided to follow suit. She had an amazing idea, a fireworks show from her balloon in front of an assembled crowd, and because the Hindenburg was still well over a century away, she had no idea how badly this could go. The fireworks set her balloon ablaze before a horrified crowd, and Blanchard fought desperately to regain control, but it was a lost cause. The basket struck the top of a nearby roof as it fell, making it flip onto the side and throw Madame Blanchard to her death on the streets below. On the bright side, it wasn't the flames that finished her. Gravity made sure it was quick. Now moving on from balloonists to bodybuilders. Iceland always seems to produce some of the world's biggest, strongest men, and one of the original examples of this was a strongman called Jean-Paul Sigmarsson. He was so obsessed with lifting that his quest to get those reps up became a part of Iceland's national identity. But the problem with Sigmarsson was that he just didn't know how to stop. He once said in an interview, "There's no reason to be alive if you can't deadlift." And Sigmarsson's obsession was about to make the dead part in deadlift a lot more literal. Sigmarsson had a congenital heart defect, something he was well aware of. It was a problem that at least 3 other members of his family were diagnosed with. And despite this, he did a crazy amount of steroids in his quest to be the biggest, buffest man in the world. Sigmarsson knew that his health was failing, and he'd even scheduled an appointment at a private heart clinic in the US. But that didn't stop him from deadlifting. He lifted so hard that his heart literally broke, a condition known as an aortic rupture, in 1993, killing him. Well, sometimes it's okay to skip arm day, especially if you want to avoid getting a Darwin Award. Next, a death so pointless and avoidable, it actually inspired his own death award. American politician Herman Cain raised eyebrows during the COVID-19 pandemic. He dismissed the virus as nothing to worry about and urged people to carry on as normal for the sake of the economy, even as it had already killed hundreds of thousands worldwide. This was a particularly bold claim for Cain to make because as a 74-year-old cancer survivor, he was part of an at-risk group. But Cain, for all his faults, was morally consistent. He appeared at public events without a mask just to show how safe it was. And then he caught COVID and died. He was such a social media power user that even death couldn't stop him from tweeting, or at least couldn't stop his team from posting from his account, including posts downplaying the very disease that had killed him. The Herman Cain Award was established for people downplaying COVID before getting their metaphorical cheeks absolutely clapped by it. What a legacy! But that death seems downright tame and rational compared to our next one, the horrifying radioactive demise of golfer and industrialist Eben Byers. How did poor Eben get so lethally irradiated? Was he caught in the blast of a nuclear bomb? At the wrong place at the wrong time? During a nuclear power plant meltdown? Nope. He was drinking the stuff. Eben was absolutely obsessed with a health supplement called Radithor. The advertising boasted that each bottle contained at least 1 microcurie of each of the radium-226 and 228 isotopes. Byers' doctor even claimed that it had such positive health effects that Eben drank several doses a day. What could possibly go wrong? Well, a lot. Eben's skin started to melt. The radiation gave him such aggressive cancer that his bottom jaw literally fell off in the last years of his life. This led to an extremely painful and totally avoidable death back in 1932. Eben was the most infamous casualty of the radium fad, where the poorly understood and extremely dangerous radioactive isotope was included in a huge range of products. It was touted for its supposed health benefits while actively killing people. Who knows how many deaths will be attributed to current TikTok health trends a century from now? These next deaths proved that even the big man upstairs can't stop the Darwin Awards, not even for his biggest fans. John Allen Chau was a 26-year-old American missionary on a one-man mission to convert isolated tribes to Christianity. Missionaries are sketchy enough at the best of times, but Chau decided to play on hard mode, attempting to illegally reach North Sentinel Island on November 15, 2018. Now, North Sentinel Island is home of the Sentinelese, a tribe of extremely territorial people who do not want outside visitors, and they will react with extreme violence if their boundaries are ignored. But they've got a very good reason for that. They've been so isolated from the rest of humanity that they haven't developed the same immunities as the rest of us. Any visitor from the outside world risks putting the entire tribe in mortal danger, with pathogens considered common for the rest of us. But John Allen Chau didn't care about that. He spent 3 days annoying the tribe before they killed him and moved on. But if you thought the Sentinelese were a tough crowd, that is nothing compared to the audience chosen by Nigerian preacher Daniel Abodunrin. Lions. Actual, literal lions. Abodunrin took his cue from another Daniel in the Bible, the one tossed into a lion's den and expected to be torn apart. However, OG Daniel was able to tame the lions by reading scripture. That's a pretty Chad move, honestly. Abodunrin had promoted himself as a self-styled prophet, so he figured maybe he could repeat his namesake's stunt and put himself on the religious map. And this is where things went bad. In 1991, Daniel decided to break into the university zoo in the city of Ibadan on Easter Sunday. He began speaking in tongues at the lions, and naturally they were pretty confused and gave the preacher a wide berth. If Daniel had any kind of sense, he would have left right then and there and called that a dub. But no, he got cocky. Daniel persisted and got closer to the lions, calling on the quote, God of Daniel to keep him safe. And then the lions tore him to shreds. Can you really say you're surprised? Staying in the religious theme, Melvin Nurse was a youth pastor doing everything he could to make his young congregation fly straight, up to and including some pretty extreme visual metaphors. He wanted to scare the youths he was tutoring into not following the path of drugs, gun violence, and sin. He did this by bringing a gun to church, specifically a revolver, so he could illustrate that the life of sin is like playing Russian roulette. Can you see where this is going? Melvin loaded a blank into the gun in front of the crowd, gave the cylinder a theatrical spin, and then pulled the trigger next to his head. The problem was, he didn't know that blanks can still be extremely dangerous. In front of a crowd of 250 people, including his wife and several children, the gun went off. The force of the blank's explosion launched a chunk of Nurse's skull into his brain. He died of his injuries 5 days later. Strangely enough, the ordeal did leave some of the congregants with a newfound fear of gun violence. After the incident, one of the at-risk youths gave up his gun to his parents, hoping to avoid the same fate. So, all's well that it ends well, we guess? Kinda? Maybe? Let's take one last look at a preacher who got an express path to the pearly gates. Plenty of Pentecostal ministers proved their faith by handling venomous snakes. One of the unluckiest was the very man who started this idiotic trend in the first place. On July 24, 1955, George Went Hensley was in the middle of one of his rousing snake handling sessions. These involved him hoisting venomous serpents overhead while chanting in tongues. It might have been a great time for his parishioners, but it wasn't such a good time for the snakes. He took one out of the box and he walked around his congregation giving a speech about the power of faith with the snake wrapped around his neck. It went pretty well, until he put it back in the box when that snake then bit him on the wrist. George was dead by the next morning. Because if God exists, he has a really dark sense of humor. But even messing with snakes and lions weren't as dangerous as the life of Hyder Korkmaz, a powerful drug trafficker in the Amsterdam underworld. That's already the kind of lifestyle that would put someone in danger. But Hyder's odds of survival dropped even further after he was arrested and cut a deal with the Dutch authorities. He agreed to testify against crime boss Willem Holleder, a terrifying figure who would have had no problem getting Hyder whacked to save himself. You would think, knowing your testimony could be vital for putting a mob boss behind bars, you would decide to lay low for a bit. Maybe get a PlayStation and catch up on your gaming list at an undisclosed safe house. But no, Hyder decided he would rather be out in the open, indulging in his favorite hobby, fly fishing. Hyder, against all advice on the matter, chose a spot right next to some high-tension power cables. And when he whipped back his line, it connected to one of the live wires, killing him instantly. One of the major motivators behind organized crime is greed, and plenty of gangsters have won Darwin Awards by letting that destroy them. We can't think of a better example than the literal plane load of top Soviet military brass back in 1981. They died in a fiery crash that killed 50 people and left the Pacific Fleet of the USSR with no senior officers. In the immediate aftermath, accusations flew left and right. Some said it was the US, in a notable escalation of Cold War violence. Some suggested it was a saboteur within the Soviet military hoping to kill his way into a promotion by creating a sudden vacancy above him. The truth of what actually happened was much simpler and much dumber. Because the USSR was notoriously corrupt, those soon-to-be obliterated generals had just gone on a lavish shopping spree in the regime's exclusive stores, the kind that the average Soviet citizen probably didn't even know existed. The military men had shoved so much swag into the plane that it was improperly secured, resulting in the fatal crash. This might be the first time a whole group of idiots has had to share their Darwin Award, but it's what these dearly deceased communists probably would have wanted. Staying in Russia, in 2011, as the New Year's celebration in Red Square approached, a woman known as the Black Widow prepared a bomb vest, alone in her home. She was part of a terrorist group who had already killed 35 people in a previous attack on a Moscow airport. This time, with an explosion during a New Year celebration, she was gonna kill even more. But there was an unprecedented hero: spam texts. The Black Widow had wired her cell phone to be the detonator for her bomb vest, but she had used her regular phone rather than a burner. When her phone received a spam text, some sources say a Happy New Year message, the bomb vest detonated instantly, killing the Black Widow and sparing every one of her intended victims. A profoundly lame way to go out for someone with such a scary nickname. Weirdly, she's not even the only Russian to go up in a totally avoidable Great Ball of Fire on this list. Unlike the Black Widow, Alexander Chechik was not a terrorist, but he somehow still came into possession of a grenade. And naturally, he decided to do a little trolling. He sent a picture of the grenade to a friend who immediately asked him if he was okay. Alex responded with, "Depends on what you mean by okay," along with a picture of the same grenade with the pin pulled out. The friend, who presumably experienced a truly historic blood pressure spike at that moment, immediately messaged his friend back telling him not to mess around. But it was already too late. Alex was under the misconception that even if the pin was removed from a grenade, it wouldn't actually explode unless you threw it. Well, that turned out to be a fatal miscalculation. Alexander never replied to his friend's text, presumably because he was a little busy existing in multiple zip codes after the grenade went off. A lot of stupid, unavoidable deaths seem to come from people in precarious situations just being plain bored. That was the fate of Davi Nunes Moreira, a Brazilian who took on a truly bizarre online challenge. In a viral trend that we assume never spread beyond Brazil, he killed a butterfly, ground it up, mixed it with water, and then he injected it into his leg. And just like that, he was dead. He might not have gone viral, but his blood definitely went toxic. But dying during dumb challenges is not a uniquely modern phenomenon by any means. According to some accounts, that is exactly what happened to Tiberius Claudius Drusus, son of Roman Emperor Claudius. Not long after he was betrothed for marriage, Drusus was doing his favorite party trick, throwing a pear up into the air and catching it in his mouth. But Drusus's title as the throat goat of Rome ended in the dumbest way possible. The falling pear lodged in his throat, and he choked to death before anyone could save him. Getting assassinated would have been a much more dignified way to go. Let's stay in the ancient world for another death that was completely stupid and avoidable. They say men often meet their dumb destinies on the very roads they take to avoid them, and there is no better example than Qin Shi Huang, the founder of the Qin dynasty, and the first Chinese ruler to call himself emperor instead of just king. But Qin's life was ruled by one enduring obsession: severe thanatophobia, the unhealthy fear of death. Although he had a pretty good reason for this obsession, to be fair. As emperor, he was constantly surviving assassination attempts and decided to solve his problem once and for all. He ordered his court alchemists to crack the secret to immortality, and given the glorious emperor would likely have them executed for failing in this task, they had considerable motivation to get the job done fast. Qin was over the moon when they brought him an immortality tincture, and then he was under the ground after he drank it. And that was because the magic immortality potion contained, among other things, mercury, which will magically guarantee you never die of old age if you drink enough of it. Speaking of guys chasing immortality only to die Darwin style, let's talk about the supposed death of the ancient Greek philosopher Empedocles. It's worth noting that a lot of ancient historians took a liberal view of the truth when recounting their histories. Think of them like YouTubers of their day. They wanted to get more eyes on their work than that of competing writers and historians, so they sexed it up a bit. One of the most famous legends about Empedocles' death claims that he aspired to godhood. To either prove that he was divine or ascend to it, he climbed Mount Etna in Sicily and jumped straight into an active volcano. But this didn't prove that Empedocles was immortal, just that he was extremely flammable. If he didn't achieve godhood, we can at least say that he achieved a Darwin Award. While we're on the stupid mythic deaths of the ancient Greeks, we have to mention another philosopher, Heraclitus. He spent his final years as a mountain hermit, convinced that he had dropsy, an ancient diagnosis of the body retaining excess fluid. Heraclitus, in all of his wisdom, decided to use an old homespun cure to get those extra fluids out and return himself to good health. He leaped into a huge pile of cow manure, hoping that the heat would evaporate the liquid in his body. Well, that was not the case. The elderly and frail Heraclitus got stuck inside of the cow poop and was then eaten by a roving pack of wild dogs. And we can't think of a better and more humiliating way to end the list than with Atlas Fredonier. He was a Swiss pioneer who discovered Fredonier Pass in 1850 and was also convicted of assaulting his stepdaughter. In 1880, Atlas was experiencing intestinal problems, and so he decided he would perform an ill-considered and disgusting home remedy, shoving a 16-ounce bottle of magnesium citrate right up his own Fredonier Pass, where it immediately got stuck. After trying to remove the bottle himself to avoid the public humiliation, he went to a local hospital, but that wouldn't help him. During efforts to remove the bottle, the top broke, literally tearing him a new one. While some parts were removed, Atlas's O-ring was beyond repair. He bled to death shortly after. We'd give him the Darwin Award, but honestly, we're a little worried about where he might put it. The Darwin Awards gave us some outrageous stories, but the US has its own collection of ridiculous ends. Watch Dumb Ways to Die USA Edition to see the most unbelievable ones, or click on this video instead.